The wind howled around a small wooden cabin, slicing through the silence of the night, like a cruel reminder to Keanu Reeves of his solitude. Inside the cabin, the warmth from the fireplace barely heated the room, unable to dispel the deep chill that consumed him. It was an emptiness, a sense of loss, that had followed him since that fateful night, months ago when everything changed. He was sitting in a simple wooden chair, a book open in his hands, but his eyes were fixed on a page he wasn't reading. Solitude was a constant visitor, and the silence of the mountain seemed to amplify every thought. He looked out the window. Only darkness and endless snow. Why am I still here? He asked himself for the 100th time. After losing the person who had been his center, Keanu had fled to Montana, believing that isolation would help him cope with the pain, but what he found instead was an endless echo of everything he had lost. The cabin, with its worn wooden walls and minimal furniture, reflected his soul at that moment, functional but empty sometimes. The silence was so deafening that he turned on the television just to hear human voices, even if they came from strangers. But today even that didn't seem to help. Suddenly a different sound. It wasn't the wind or the crackling wood in the fireplace, but something else alive, a soft groan. Weak, almost lost in the storm's noise. Keanu furrowed his brow. Am I hearing things? He murmured, his voice sounding strange in the empty space. But the sound came again, weaker, this time almost a whisper lost in the wind. He stood up slowly, his heart racing. Grabbing a lantern nearby, he walked to the door. When he opened it, the cold wind rushed in, sending a chill down his spine. He narrowed his eyes, looking into the void, until something caught his attention. Marks in the snow, as if something had been dragged. But what could it be? A mix of curiosity and unease made him put on his coat and step outside. Each step in the deep snow felt harder than the last, and the darkness around him seemed to whisper, urging him to turn back. The solitude he carried inside now seemed to be external too. Everything around him was desolate, inhospitable, as if it reflected what he felt within. But there was something about the trail he couldn't ignore, a primal instinct, perhaps an unconscious desire, to do something meaningful, even if only for a moment. Further ahead he heard it again, a weak groan, almost imperceptible, but filled with suffering. The pain in those sounds was as tangible as his own. Keanu continued to follow the tracks in the snow, his steps slow, the lantern trembling slightly in his hand. The faint sound he had heard earlier now seemed distant, almost swallowed by the howling storm. The darkness around him felt thicker, and every movement in the white blanket seemed to heighten the tension. A few meters ahead, he saw a dark figure standing out against the snow. As he approached, the beam of light revealed the scene. A large dog lying there, trembling from the cold. Its fur was frozen stiff and it looked exhausted, barely able to lift its head. Keanu knelt slowly, careful not to startle the animal. Hey buddy, are you okay? His voice was low, gentle, but the dog let out a weak growl, almost inaudible. Then he noticed something strange. The dog was lying partially on its side, as if protecting something. Keanu angled the lantern and saw that the dog's body was covering a small depression in the snow. Are you protecting something? He murmured, more to himself. The biting wind gave him no time to think. He knew he had to act fast. Reaching into his coat pocket, he pulled out a piece of jerky that he usually carried for snacks during his walks. Holding it out, he tried to gain the dog's trust. Look, I just want to help. The animal hesitated, its eyes struggling to stay open. Slowly it gave in, nibbling at the meat. Keanu seized the moment to move closer. He placed an improvised blanket over the dog and with care began to move the snow from beneath it. The freezing temperature made his hands ache, but he pushed forward. As he removed the last handful of snow, he heard a nearly imperceptible sound, a soft, sharp hiss coming from where the dog had been lying. Keanu froze, his eyes widening, trying to understand what was happening. He felt a different kind of shiver, one that didn't come from the cold. Keanu blinked a few times, trying to focus on the sound that now seemed clearer. It was a sound of life, delicate and fragile. He moved more snow away from around the dog, revealing a small cavity the dog had been protecting. With its body inside, curled up and almost motionless, were two tiny rabbit babies. Their minuscule paws trembled, and their eyes barely seemed able to open. They were covered in snowflakes, their thin bodies almost translucent from the cold. My God, Keanu whispered. Both surprised and moved, he looked at the dog, whose heavy, exhausted eyes seemed to say, please take care of them. He gently picked up the rabbits, using his scarf to wrap them up. They were so light, they barely had any weight in his hands, and the warmth of the fabric seemed to be their only thread of hope. To keep them alive, Keanu looked back at the dog, feeling a surge of respect and admiration rise within him. This animal, on the brink of exhaustion, had sacrificed itself to protect such small and helpless creatures. "You're a real hero, you know that," he murmured, gently stroking the dog's head. But time was not on their side. The wind was picking up and the snow was now hitting his face like small shards of glass. Keanu knew he had no choice. He needed to get everyone back to the cabin fast. He wrapped the dog in the makeshift blanket and tried to lift him into his arms. The dog was heavier than he had expected, and his own legs struggled to move in the snow. With tremendous effort, he managed to drape the dog over his shoulders, keeping the rabbit babies warm against his chest. Each step was a battle against the storm. The snow reached his knees, and the wind seemed to push him back, but he refused to stop. The weight in his arms and shoulders grew with each step, but something inside him kept pushing him forward. A mix of compassion, purpose, and perhaps a need to prove to himself that there was still something to believe in. Finally, the cabin appeared in the distance. The weak light from the window was like a beacon, and Keanu felt a thread of relief mixed with exhaustion. He used his last reserves of strength to reach the door, pushing it open with his shoulder and stepping into the warmth of the cabin. Inside, he carefully placed the dog near the fire, still wrapped in the blanket. The rabbits, now warmed, made small sounds, signaling they were still alive. Keanu looked at the trio before him, the dog and the baby rabbits, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection, but the battle wasn't over yet. He knew the dog was in critical condition, and the rabbits were still extremely weak. He needed to act fast to ensure they all survived the night. Inside the cabin, Keanu quickly set up a space near the fireplace. He placed the dog on a rug and wrapped him in layers of blankets to try to warm him up. The baby bunnies, still fragile, were carefully placed in a basket near the fire, also wrapped in the scarf he had been wearing. "You're going to be okay," he murmured to the dog, while adding more firewood to the fireplace, trying to increase the warmth in the room. But he knew that wouldn't be enough. Keanu ran to the small kitchen, grabbing whatever he had on hand, a little milk which he heated in a pan, and some breadcrumbs that might serve to feed the bunnies. He grabbed a clean syringe from an old first aid kit and began carefully dropping the milk into the babies' mouths. One of them tried to drink, while the other was still too weak. "Come on, you can do it," he said, his voice low and determined. The dog, on the other hand, didn't seem to be getting better. He lay on his side, breathing slowly and irregularly, his eyes half open. Keanu felt a pang of despair as he looked at him. This animal had sacrificed everything to protect those fragile lives, and now it seemed like he himself was about to succumb. "Don't give up, buddy. You've made it this far, I won't let you go," Keanu said gently, massaging the dog's paws to stimulate circulation. The storm outside continued fiercely, and the wind seemed intent on invading the cabin. Keanu fought against time and exhaustion, but he refused to stop. He heated up some soup to feed the dog, using a spoon to drip the liquid into his mouth. After what felt like hours, the dog finally swallowed a little. "That's it, boy. You're fighting, I know you are," he said, his voice renewed with hope. Meanwhile, the bunnies began to move more vigorously. The warmth and milk seemed to be working, and one of them even tried to stand. Keanu felt a wave of relief. At least the little ones were responding, but the dog remained in critical condition. Keanu knew that the effort the animal had made to protect the bunnies had drained almost all of his life energy. He looked at the dog and said, "If they're alive, it's because of you. Now it's my turn to take care of you." He stayed awake all night, feeding the bunnies little by little and checking on the dog constantly. The cold seemed to seep through the cabin walls, but the warmth from the fire and Keanu's determination were stronger. Finally, at dawn, a moment of hope, the dog slightly moved his head and let out a soft sound like a sigh of relief. He opened his eyes and looked at Keanu with an expression that seemed to convey gratitude. Keanu smiled for the first time in a long while. "You made it, buddy. You're stronger than you think." The bunnies, now more active, started exploring the little basket they were in, full of curiosity in life. Keanu looked at them and at the dog, feeling a mix of relief and joy he hadn't felt in a long time. The soft morning light began to filter through the cabin windows, painting the interior with golden hues and dissipating the weight of the previous night. The dog, now more awake, tried to rise. His legs trembled, but there was a determination in his eyes that made Keanu step closer and gently support him. "Take it easy, buddy. You've done so much for them. Now it's time to rest," Keanu said as he stroked the dog's head. The bunnies, in turn, were visibly stronger. They had huddled together in the basket, but now they started to move with curiosity. Exploring the space with small, hesitant hops, Keanu watched the scene for a few moments, feeling an inexplicable warmth in his chest. It was as if life had returned to the cabin. In a way he hadn't expected. For months he had isolated himself, believing that silence and emptiness would be his only companions. But now, surrounded by these tiny lives, he realized something: these animals, so vulnerable, had fought against the forces of nature and won. The dog, with its protective instinct, had sacrificed everything to save them. And he, Keanu, who had been running from his own pain, had found a new reason to move forward. The dog was already able to walk around the cabin. Though still weak, he followed Keanu everywhere, as if he had adopted the man as his new leader. Keanu, in turn, began calling the dog Guardian, a name that symbolized the bravery he had shown. The bunnies, still small and fragile, were taken to a local wildlife shelter that Keanu personally visited. He handed the little ones over to a biologist who assured him they would be cared for and released back into the wild. Once they were ready, "You did your part, Guardian," Keanu said to the dog, gently stroking his head. "Now it's time to give them the chance to live." On the way back to the cabin, Keanu reflected on everything that had happened. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. By saving those animals, he realized he had also rescued something within himself, a part he thought was lost. Sitting in front of the fireplace, Guardian by his side, Keanu looked at the fire, but this time with a peaceful smile on his face. He gently stroked the dog, who was sleeping soundly, and murmured, "You saved me more than I saved you." Even in the toughest moments, unexpected connections can bring back the light we thought we had lost. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Who knows, maybe you'll be the next person to make a difference in someone's life, or in the life of a special being.